At 800 feet, the first thing I noticed wasn't the excavator. It was the color. Fresh dirt where there should have been clean summer grass. I banked the Cessna 182 left and circled again. That's when I saw the equipment, 2 tracked machines cutting straight lines through my runway. The windsock was gone. My tie-down area was churned into mud. I didn't key the mic. There was no one to call. Instead, I diverted and put her down on Miller's North Pasture, the emergency access strip we'd agreed on years ago. Short roll. Clean shutdown. From the fence line, I watched the bucket drop onto my parked aircraft. One push crushed the wing spar. The second folded the fuselage like tin. The HOA president stood near a patrol car. Arms folded, posture relaxed. He was explaining something to the deputies, measured, confident. When I walked up, he looked at me evenly. "You don't have permission to land here anymore." I let that sit. "You may want to call your insurance carrier." Silence stretched between us, but let me back up. My father bought that acreage in 1968, when the nearest paved road was 2 miles east, and the only sound at night was wind moving through cedar. Heavy clay soil, stubborn in the wet season, solid as brick by August. Residents invited. He learned early which direction the crosswinds favored, and where the tree line had to be cut back to keep a clean approach from the south. We shaped the drainage ourselves, shallow swales running parallel to the pasture so spring rain wouldn't pool. Nothing fancy, just careful. In 2003, the county approached us about emergency access. Wildfire seasons were getting worse, highways unreliable. We signed a contingency agreement allowing medevac helicopters and fixed-wing support to use the field if needed. 5 years later, I leveled and seeded 1,800 feet of turf. Private use, no business, no fuel sales. I filed the notice, received an FAA identifier, and watched it appear on sectional charts like a quiet footnote. The subdivision came after. The HOA came decades later. The Airstrip didn't. Richard Holbrook wasn't loud. He didn't need to be. Semi-retired developer, pressed shirts, practiced cadence. He quoted bylaws the way other men quote scripture. At meetings, he spoke slowly, hands folded, as if everyone else were slightly behind. The first letter arrived on heavy paper. Aucklide commercial aviation activity. Then NICE nuisance. Then unapproved structural use. Each citation carried a fine $200 per day. A month later, it increased to 5. I responded once, in writing. FAA registration confirmation. Private use designation. County zoning compliance. Copy of the emergency contingency agreement recorded with the clerk. No commentary, just attachments. The board replied that the grading and runway development constituted an improvement not approved by the architectural committee. Aviation documentation, they said, was irrelevant to covenant compliance. That was the divide. They relied on internal votes and amended bylaws. I relied on statutes, federal registry entries, and recorded easements. Paper threats began stacking notice of levy, intent to lien, and finally a scheduled vote authorizing remediation action to restore the lot to community standards. He wasn't emotional about it. He was certain they never sought a court order. Instead, the board voted to remove a hazardous, non-compliant structure and hired a local excavation company to execute it. The justification cited amended setback rules passed years after most of the homes were built. According to their memo, the strip violated updated community standards and posed risk exposure. I was in Oklahoma finishing a recurrent certification when my phone vibrated. A neighbor had sent video. 2 tracked bulldozers moved methodically across the turf, carving trenches through drainage swales my father and I had shaped by hand. The grading was deliberate, clinical. Then the excavator pivoted toward my tied-down Cessna. Holbrook stood nearby in a sport coat, speaking with deputies who had arrived after a noise complaint. I could see his posture measured, explanatory. Civil matter, he was saying. HOA enforcement. The bucket pressed down on the wing. Aluminum doesn't argue. The spar snapped with a dull, irreversible bend. I watched the rest without comment. When I landed back home, I didn't raise my voice. I told my attorney to request their insurance certificate and the contractor agreement. Then I called the regional FAA Flight Standards district office. I keep records the way some people keep trophies. The FAA Form 7480-1 acknowledgement was in a fireproof drawer in my office. Private use landing area. Reviewed. Noted. Assigned an identifier. It matched the sectional chart listing I downloaded every year. Next to it was the county recorded emergency access, easement signed, stamped, and indexed. In 2012, when wildfire seasons intensified, the county attached a grant assurance addendum tied to contingency funding. It wasn't large money, but it carried obligations. The strip was identified as auxiliary support if primary routes were compromised. That detail mattered. Any alteration or obstruction of a charted landing facility associated with emergency planning requires federal notification and review. There's a form for it, FAA Form 7460-1. Notice of Proposed Construction or Ation or Alteration. The HOA never filed one. They never requested an airspace determination. They never asked whether they had jurisdiction to interfere with something tied, however quietly, to navigable airspace. I didn't threaten them. I didn't send another letter. I filed a formal complaint alleging unauthorized alteration of a registered aeronautical facility and potential interference with navigable airspace. After that, the conversation moved above the county level. The first certified envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning. The return address read Federal Aviation Administration. The second came 2 days later from Department of Transportation Regional Council. The tone was different from HOA correspondence. No bold fonts, no exclamation points, just language that carried weight. Federal preemption, oscillate destruction of aviation infrastructure, potential violation of 49 U.S.C., paragraph 40103 regarding sovereignty of airspace. By Friday, the association's attorney, who had previously reduced the matter to a covenant dispute, advised the board to suspend all grading activity immediately pending federal review. An FAA inspector drove out the following week. He walked the length of what remained of the strip with a measuring wheel, logged coordinates, photographed the trenched drainage lines, then circled the wreckage of the aircraft. He documented the crushed wing root, the buckled firewall, the snapped spar. Holbrook approached him with the same calm posture he used at meetings. It's private property under HOA jurisdiction, he explained. The inspector didn't argue. He simply asked, who authorized alteration of a federally charted landing facility? Holbrook repeated his point. The inspector's reply was even. Airspace and navigational facilities are not. That was the moment the ground shifted. I filed in district court the following Monday. Count 1. Destruction of aircraft insured value, $186,000. Count 2. Trespass and unlawful entry. Count 3. Conversion and destruction of protected aeronautical infrastructure tied to recorded easements. No adjectives. Just facts, dates, and attached exhibits. At the same time, the FAA formally opened an obstruction and interference investigation. That shifted timelines. Federal reviews don't move quickly, but they move deliberately. The excavation contractor requested a meeting within a week. Their counsel had reviewed the board's authorization letter, signed by Holbrook, certifying that the association possessed full legal authority to remove the non-compliant structure. Contractor had relied on that representation. Insurance carriers began circling. Questions surfaced about intentional acts exclusions and whether the policy covered deliberate demolition without judicial order. The board asked for mediation. I agreed. In the conference room, I didn't revisit the argument. I slid a single document across the table terms for resolution. Full aircraft replacement value. Restoration of the runway to prior FAA specifications. Written retraction of all violation claims. Resignation of the HOA president. Everything supported. Everything documented. No raised voice. Just numbers. The special meeting filled faster than usual. Word travels quickly when liability is involved. Most homeowners arrived expecting confrontation, raised maybe a spectacle. Instead, they found packets on their chairs. Inside were copies of the FAA, correspondence, the Department of Transportation letter, and a summary prepared by the association's counsel outlining potential exposure, aircraft loss, infrastructure restoration, legal fees, federal penalties. The estimate exceeded $400,000, not including possible personal liability, if board members were found to have acted outside the scope of their authority. The attorney stood and explained preemption in plain language. HOA covenants govern aesthetics and internal standards. They do not supersede Federal Aviation Authority or navigable airspace protections. Holbrook described the situation as a misunderstanding regarding jurisdiction. Then the compliance letter was read aloud. The room went still. No one interrupted. No one defended the grading. A homeowner in the third row moved for leadership transition in the association's best interest. The motion was seconded without discussion. The vote wasn't dramatic. It was decisive. Restoration took 6 weeks. The contractor regraded the clay base to prior elevation, recut the drainage swales to their original pitch, and reseeded the full 1,800 feet with certified turf mix. An FAA inspector returned, walked the strip, confirmed dimensions, and logged the field as serviceable. My insurer paid the aircraft claim, then pursued subrogation directly against the association. I didn't involve myself in that process. Holbrook resigned quietly. No public apology tour, no dramatic exit. His reputation shifted in a way that doesn't reverse. Local news called twice. I declined both times. Instead, I hosted a Saturday open house. Coffee in the hangar. A short briefing on how auxiliary landing strips support wildfire response and rural medevac access. Questions answered. No speeches. The tone changed after that. Ownership stopped looking like defiance. It looked like stewardship. I didn't need to win publicly. I needed to win publicly. I needed the boundary understood. And there's a difference between authority and jurisdiction. HOAs govern paint colors, fence heights, mailbox styles. They don't govern federal airspace. What happened out here wasn't about noise or aesthetics. It was about assuming power without checking boundaries. Paper rules feel solid until they run into statutes written at a different level. I never needed to outshout anyone. I needed documentation, patience, and a clear understanding of where local control ends. Most people don't realize how many federal protections sit quietly on their property until someone with a clipboard tests the boundary. Next time, I'll tell you about the Marina Board that tried to seize a dock that technically belonged to the Army Corps of Engineers.